Hello again. It's my voice, Katie. Get to talk some more. So we're going to get started with the next presentation that we have. This is one that I think many of us are really excited to hear. So this one is called Working Together, Building a Standards-Based National Lending Network in Australia, ISO 18626. And this presentation is going to be given to us by Alan Jones, Senior Director of Digital Libraries and Technical Services at the New School, Germain, the Deputy CEO of CAVAL Limited, and involved in this as well is Katie Birch, the Senior Director of Product Management at Clarivate, Sebastian Hammer, the Chief Executive Officer at Index Data, Mike Richins, Director of Product Management Resource Sharing Clarivate, Mallory Kasinec, Product Manager ReShare and Index Data. And now I'm going to turn it over to our friends online.
Hey everybody, can you all hear me?
I can hear you, so hopefully they can hear you.
Okay, well that's a good sign. My name's Alan Jones, and I just want to welcome everybody today. The way I get into resource sharing, and I think it's important to at least provide some context here, because you're probably asking, what is somebody from technical services or systems actually coming in talking about resource sharing? Well, I would actually argue that many of us have come from very different and probably very strange places when it actually came into how to participate in resource sharing. For me, I was actually working with the Ex Libris users of North America many, many years ago on trying to figure out how to integrate Iliad and Primo, as well as through SFX. And after that, I really started getting much more involved in how all these systems actually wound up talking to one another. That led to a partnership with Pennsylvania Academic Library Consortium, Inc. at the time. PAL-C has now changed their name to an open source project called Project ReShare and the membership on the subject matter experts group to talk about some of the different features that libraries needed within a resource sharing platform, or in the case of New School, platforms, and figuring out how all of these actually talk to one another. Through encouragement from Sebastian Hammer and from others, I participated on the ISO 18626 group, and then later became the technical lead for the new version. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
G'day, folks. I'm Sarah Germine, and I'm the Deputy CEO of CAVAL. And similar to Alan, I'm guessing that it's not every day that you see a Deputy CEO talking about resource sharing and interlibrary loans, but it was actually my first job as in the library sector around document delivery and resource sharing. And actually, it's next week that is my 15th anniversary of resource sharing and being in this space. And it's been a bit of a ride. I do have to say things have changed, especially in the last 3 or so years. And in the past 3 years, I've joined the Project ReShare product committee, and also I was the project lead from the CAVAL perspective of the Trove implementation of ReShare in Australia. And I guess similar to Alan in the way that I found that I needed to be able to work out ways to bring systems together. And I have a bit of an open source background as well. So Project ReShare was very much within my wheelhouse of showing how open standards and open systems can actually talk to each other and provide equity of access to accessing knowledge. But with that, I'll hand back over to Alan.
So when we were first putting together this presentation, one of the things that we thought about was the problem space of resource sharing, because it literally touches everything. Whether we're talking about discovery, whether we're talking about request processing, whether we're talking about brokering those requests to one another, or the actual messaging of the ISO 18626 protocol to actually get the thing to the requesting library. It's really important. So we could probably talk about this, and I'm sure we'll talk about this all day. But the part that I'm specifically the most involved in is around this ISO messaging problem. The how does it get to me? How does the requesting library answer, request material to a potential supplying library, and then how do they actually communicate back and forth to actually get the book to the requesting library? So as there are a number of different levels that we could actually be talking about this. And I think that one of the most important parts of this is making sure that it's not just important to say that something is ISO compliant, but we also have to start thinking about what that actually means when two different systems talks to one another. For example, at New School, we're an Alma institution that participates in Project ReShare, but we're also a Rapido customer, and we also use Iliad. So we don't just have a single system that does any one thing. We actually have to have, in order to have a seamless resource sharing experience, not just for the patrons, but also for our staff, all of these systems have to be talking in concert with one another. So it occurs to me, back in 2017, when I was working with the interoperability special interest working group within Illuna, we really came up with a position paper that talked about 3 different types of integration. The first was vertical integration, and vertical integration is really about kind of who owns the different parts of the stack, right? So, for example, if your solution is doing discovery, if it's doing the requesting, if it's doing the brokering, and it's actually doing the lending, and all of that is done by the same company, then you have a situation where the seamlessness of it is really based on the roadmaps of that particular company. One of the problems, or actually 2 of the problems, no lending network can have everything as much as we'd like it to. And more importantly, different softwares excel at different types of things. So being able to kind of move that request in and out of these systems is a really important and critical part of thinking about not just what needs to happen now, but also where it is that the ISO standard is actually taking us. So one of the problems here is something called transfer request. And what transfer request basically means, and the metaphor that's consistently used, is you're throwing a request over a wall, right? And what that means is that not only do you have to subscribe to the software that sends the request, but in order to actually monitor the workflow, you actually have to be a participant in the other supplying network as well. And so this has actually been quite an area of friction, as well as resource cost for different libraries. Because if you're just using a single network, there may be things that you're not able to present to your patrons. So what do? Well, with transfer request, you can send it to another broker. That broker then sends a request out to its network, and then basically you figure out how it is that you can lend something. Now, where we'd really like to go is that not only could we go back to the broker and seamlessly talk so that everyone in the blue silo can actually understand what's going on in the orange silo, and the orange silo folks will know kind of where the request is for the blue folks. But we want to make sure that that compatibility allows for that kind of seamless updating. So vertical integration basically can be really great when it comes to innovation, but it's really hard to talking with other people. So another potential route to go is horizontal integration. And horizontal integration basically means that all these parts are actually from different vendors. So you're leveraging the strengths of each of these components. But now you have the problem of synchronization, or you have this problem where you've got to figure out how to talk to one another for each of these components. And it's incredibly resource intensive to figure out how to get this working. On the one hand, it's where open source thrives. But on the other, many times, if standards aren't implemented consistently, you can really see things break down. So again, we can send things to vended networks, but where we really want to go is not just having things, sending things to networks, but ideally, we'd like to be able to have libraries be able to pick other libraries that they can actually lend with directly. So many of the situations that have arisen out of this kind of solution of either vertical or horizontal, we're now starting to see a lot of solutions that are actually mixed. And you'll see that we can either do this through the broker, or if we work with 18626, we can actually have peer-to-peer lending. So what is this ISO 18626 of which I speak? I used to, in a previous presentation, said every time I said it, people needed to take a drink. But what it is it's a protocol that has been around. Well, there was a previous version of it that's been around since 1997. And what it's really tried to do is work between libraries to send messages that to request other libraries' material, as well as to bring it into their circulation system for a patron to use it and then to ship it back. It's also been more recently adapted for document delivery for different types of scanning services, as well as more recent versions within 2021 has also supported some work to support controlled digital lending. So the protocol has had different iterations. Every 5 years, there's a new revision. 2027 will represent the 4th revision of this protocol. And it's really meant to it's really meant to simplify things and to make them more accessible over the internet. Previously, 10.160 and 10.161, the previous version of these ILL systems, you used to have to open up ports on firewalls. You used to have to configure both systems to work. One of the things that was an advancement within 18626 was it became internet available. It became internet ready. And it simplified all of the messages that 10.160 and 10.161 had from 40 down to 3. A requester message, a supplier message, as well as a transfer request message. So with that, a lot of both library service platforms as well as integrated library solutions included 18626 endpoints into either their circulation system, or they created an ILL module, or they included it actually within the ILS itself. Alma, for example, is one solution that has Alma resource sharing, where you can actually talk to any library in its community zone through this particular standard. So one of the things that I want to just kind of say at the outset is not only is there vertical and horizontal integration, there's also something that we call social integration, or um, basically believing or having the same or common goals for particular types of interoperability. This social integration is absolutely critical in order to actually move the needle forward. There's some ways that some of this interoperability can be really difficult. One of the things that I was going to say is that this particular project that Sarah's going to be talking about has probably been one of the best projects that I've worked on in my 25 years in libraries. It's actually being able to see different systems talking to of different literally operating systems, being able to pass messages back and forth is incredibly important, because one of the things that's really difficult about ISO 18626 is that even if you are speaking it, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's compatible. And we're going to talk quite deeply about that in a few minutes. But at its highest level, this project represents collectively hundreds of hours of people working together within towards these common goals of getting these systems, these networks to actually talk to one another. ISO 18626 is predicated on the idea that it's library to library communication, but trying to think about what that means, moving it to the level of the network, or moving it from a library talking to a network or a network talking to a specific library, has really been where the area of innovation has been for this product, for this project. This has also been one of the most frustrating experiences that I've had working with systems, mainly because you become incredibly aware of where and how things are aligned and where they're not, and just how far out the roadmaps actually are. Let me just give you an example here. So on the left, you're actually going to see the state model of what ReShare does when it actually goes through the process of a loan to a particular library within its network. Their new request is created. It sends a message called expects to supply. Expects to supply basically acknowledges the receipt of the request, but then says, I haven't located it yet, or I don't have the book in hand yet. Will supply basically means that the item is ready to be shipped, that the conditions have all been met, and that we definitely can send this to you. The status change basically goes to loaned, so that we can say that the book is on its way. The requesting library can say, I've received the book, and then I've shipped the book back. Well, in ALMA, that state model is actually compressed, in part because the philosophies are actually a little bit different. There, they create a new request, and they automatically perform a locate process, so they already know if the book is in hand or not. And so that change in the number of steps actually creates a bit of a disfluency in terms of the messages that are brought back and forth. So you could be completely compliant in terms of sending messages of ISO 18626, but unless you actually know what it is that you're doing in terms of what the responding system is able to receive or what it isn't, it can actually make communication incredibly difficult. There are even more simple things in terms of sending ISIL numbers or letters, whether they should be capitalized or whether they should be in lowercase. So even at this level of kind of interoperability, we found that these two systems actually didn't match. So this whole project has been about figuring out where things work and where it is that they don't. So part of this is not through any fault of Ex Libris's or through any fault of any provider. It's really that through the evolution of the protocol, because what happened was that a lot of these recommendations in this oversimplification to 3 messages, a lot of the rules for all of these steps were actually thrown out the window. So what this basically does is this creates collisions. ReShare, for example, wants to create more of a chat-like experience where the library is actually negotiating the terms and the conditions before sending it. ALMA, on the other hand, emphasizes efficiency. So it already does a lot of things automatically, and this kind of conditional type of thing can actually hold up a book actually getting into the patron's hands. Again, different philosophical assumptions will actually create different types of manifestations of the state model. So when you realize that now we have to figure out, are we talking soda, or are we talking pop, or are we talking soft drink? just to kind of bring our friends from Quebec into this, that can actually create a lot of communication problems even though you're talking about the same thing. So the lesson here is, even though your system is speaking a compliant ISO 18626 message, a vendor stating support here might not be enough to actually guarantee compatibility. So if you're using Alma and you're using ReShare, or you're using OpenRS or one of these other platforms, they may not be compatible because they're not following the other vendors' assumptions in terms of the state models. However, it also means they may not be incompatible. And so this was actually where we found ourselves with ReShare. And more importantly, I think it really showed how much could be done through shared commitment, through shared work together, and a lot of translation between soda and pop and soft drink. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Sarah to talk about the project that we worked on.
Thank you, Alan. And before we continue, I just wanted to do a quick acknowledgement of country. I'm coming to you from Nam, which is the traditional name for Melbourne, meaning the place of, which means place, from the language of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. Nam is actually an important place for the Kulin Nations to bring together people, culture, and most of all, knowledge. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations people that are with us today. Sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Next slide, please, Alan. So with that, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit as to what is CAVAL and what is the National Library, and I'll also talk about Trove in just a second. But CAVAL was established in 1978 as a consortium owned by some of the most prestigious libraries in Australia. And over the past 40 years, CAVAL has expanded to diversify to become an organisation working at national and international scale, but one of which that its core commitment was to provide benefit through collaboration. And CAVAL has about 40 to 50 staff at the moment, located in the state of Victoria. CAVAL is actually structured, which is limited by guarantee by the 8 universities, and its constitution specifies that we're here to assist libraries and educational purposes. So we have things including the management of a shared collection, a last copy shared collection of approximately 850,000 print volumes. We provide English and languages other than English materials to academic and public libraries, storage facilities for libraries, public records, and galleries. And if you're ever in Melbourne, please do come and see our lovely storage facility. We do have random things like old dentist chairs and also the entire Mills and Boon collection, if you know what Mills and Boon is. Digital services, we also provide that as well for journal usage statistics and institutional repository statistics. And also we build capability within the library and information profession with providing digital support for skill type, but also a mentoring program and other professional development activities. But going back to resource sharing, CAVAL has actually played a vital role in supporting interlibrary loans and resource sharing since the implementation of our own reciprocal borrowing program. And it was in the late 70s that we had actually established that. And in 2001, we implemented the old VDX system, and we were the actual original home of the OCLC offices in Australia. And since then, we've provided support for a number of resource sharing initiatives in Australia, which now includes ReShare. The National Library is responsible under the terms of the National Library Act of 1960 for maintaining and developing a national collection of library material, including a comprehensive collection of library material relating to Australian and Australian people. This functions as a national library. It encompasses all physical and digital formats, from books to newspapers, maps to online publications, manuscripts, photos, you name it, they've got it. And in 2019, they have over about 7.7 million items in their collection, and about 17,000 meters of manuscript material. With that, I do need to say that this is from my view of things, and I'm not actually representing the National Library, I'm representing CAVAL. Next slide, please, Alan. So the National Library, or the NLA, hosts what we call Trove, and Trove is our cultural heritage discovery service, which includes access to the Australian Web Archive and the National E-Deposit, a large collection of digitised newspapers, official documents, manuscripts, and images, as well as other born digital material. But it's not just Trove that supports, not just this, but Trove also supports the national infrastructure for the Australian National Bibliographic Database, a cataloguing client for the libraries, collection management and digitising services, and also the national resource sharing infrastructure. Next slide, please. So a little bit of a trip down under. So it's very similar to what you folks have gone through. We're about 10 years behind, I do have to say, but in some ways we've actually jumped ahead of the game. So you can see here that we implemented our National Bibliographic Database, but also went through our VDX implementation. And then in 2022 was a resource sharing landscape review, where we did a review of all the systems that Australia has. And you can see here in this little graph that resource sharing transactions was actually dropping as the years were going on, and COVID was not helpful in any way. But it was actually recognised that it was an important piece of infrastructure that needed to keep going. And whilst the numbers were dropping, it was still going to remain a vital piece of infrastructure in Australia. And in 2025, Trove Partners resource sharing system, which is ReShare, went live. And this was a relatively long process, but we got there in the end. Next slide, please. So the problem that we had was that we had our legacy system with a hard end of life date. So that's VDX, which was supporting the national resource sharing system back in the day, and it officially finished at the end of June this year. Libraries had a broad range of needs, systems, and access points. We had a mixture of Alma, we had Koha, Sierra, we still had VDX, we had some relay libraries, and it was just a mixture of different systems, but also we had libraries that had a single librarian in them that we also had to support. So we had to have a system that was relatively easy to use and anyone could get access to. A lot of libraries amongst the Trove membership didn't actually have their own library management system as well. They were using spreadsheets to provide access to the systems. Data sovereignty was also an issue, where we have to make sure that the data is within our borders, and making sure that if we do have instances of a right of reply, we need to be able to pull back data and information that we share. Next slide, please. So building for the future, the points that we needed to consider was things like equity of access. Every library needed to be equal, and we needed to make sure that systems were able to provide access to resource sharing regardless of what system you were using. We also needed to take into account that our copyright laws are very much different to the copyright laws in the US and to the UK and any other country. We also took into account, as I mentioned, the right of reply and access protocols. Also, to be able to take in things like formalized and informal networks as well. So CAVAL has its own consortium versus the public libraries have one. The states also have one as well. And we need to take those into account. We also needed to take into account the Australian National Bibliographic Database. We have this wonderful resource of a centralized index. We should be able to use that. And as you can see here, this is a bit of a drawing of our first designs when we were responding to the tender. Next slide, please. So the solution that we provided, we submitted for, was to completely integrate the National Bibliographic Database. So we used their identifier numbers. We also had to provide the opportunity to either have a reciprocal service or a paid service as well. So libraries were able to charge each other for interlibrary loans, or if they had a reciprocal agreement, they'd be able to join in that reciprocal network as well. We also wanted to create the ability for subgroups amongst the partners. So as I mentioned, we wanted to create different groups for consortia, but also Australia is a relatively large country, and getting a book from one end of the country to the other can take up to 5 days sometimes, and that is a bit too long to get access to a book. We also wanted to implement automated load balancing to remove the need to create manual lists and rotas, and also to provide something for the future and making sure that this is a long-standing system. And obviously, we had VDX for such a long time. We wanted to make sure that we were doing this right and implementing something for the long haul. But the other piece was that it must be ISO 18626 compliant as well. And this was because we wanted to provide that equity of access and to allow for libraries that were using any system that was ISO 18626 compliant to be able to come play within our resource sharing world. Next slide, please, Alan. So as a result, it was announced in May 2024 that we, CAVAL and Index Data had won the tender for the National Resource Sharing Platform. We were able to provide and facilitate a system agnostic resource sharing scheme to operate for the collective benefit of Australian libraries. CAVAL has regularly supported projects designed to offer better and more cost-effective options that appeal to our members and also the broader library community. So we actually looked through the open source alternative, and that was Project ReShare, and Index Data was our partner already for our library management platform, and they were well suited for us to be able to submit for the tender together. And here we are today. Next slide, please. So the unique workflow that we do have is the requester submits the request and the system ReShare receives said request. Now, there is no patrons that are submitting the request here. This is all the librarians themselves. It was opted that patrons wouldn't be interacting with the system and it would just be the librarians. And from receiving the request, ReShare would search the A and BD holdings, and it will go off to the Australian National Bibliographic Database, create a rota, and then do some load balancing on top of that. And I am oversimplifying this, by the way, but this is just for the for the sake of the presentation. It will build the rota and based on the network and the membership. So this includes how quickly you would like to turn this around. So is it within 3 days? Is it within 24 hours? How much are you willing to pay? That's also part of the rota building. And also if, you know, there's more than one library that's available, if it's so we can geographically group them as well. The routes, as I mentioned, are then load balanced, and then it will go off to the responder. So that's either another ReShare library or to an Alma Rapido library at the moment. And then it just goes through the full cycle. Next slide, please. So the end product looks a bit like this. So a librarian goes into the Australian National Bibliographic Database, which is the first screenshot there, and we'll look for an item and we'll then click a Get It Now button. It will then take us to the Trove Partners Resource Sharing login page where you can choose your institution to pick if you're from which library you're in. And then it will take you into ReShare, which will be a fairly clean sort of familiar look, but you've got your request ID, there's a created and updated date. If it's been loaned, there's an item barcode there. And we have patron in there because it was originally designed as a patron system, but it will just be a generic user. And it will also tell you the state that it's in. Next slide, please. So Go Live was interestingly a bit of an anticlimactic situation where we had pressed the button and just sat there and waited for a few hours, and requests were sort of dribbling in, but we'd over prepared for such a thing that it just came a bit anticlimactic. So we all sat there in Canberra. So this is a group photo of the Trove folks, myself and my colleague Sean, and Index Data folks that's on the telly, and we've chucked in Alan in there because he was a latecomer to the group, but we had to make sure that he got in the group photo as well. But you can see here that in the 3rd week of May, we went live with direct access, which is the libraries that are using the Trove Partners resource sharing system. And the reciprocal tier went live. So this was free loans between the libraries. The 2nd week of July was when all the Alma and Rapido libraries went live. And then August was when we turned on the paid tiers as well, so that the libraries could charge each other. And since then, we've been developing reports and dealing with the finances on the app after that as well. Next slide, please. And I'll hand over to Alan.
So one of the things that was really important about this project was trying to figure out how you could actually separate the network from the request processing software. So whether you were running ReShare, whether you were running Rapido, Alma, whatever, what Crosslink basically does, Crosslink is the kind of broker system that ReShare is adopting. It acts as an 18626 translator. So whether it's soda, whether it's pop, or whether it's soft drink, basically there's a thesaurus that can kind of modify some of those messages back and forth. And really what that does is that talks about the state of the industry now in terms of not being able to send these requests interoperably back and forth. There are instances where the broker not only checks the request and the supplier. You heard that Sarah talks about including the ANBD so that the supplying library can locate that really quickly. But the broker can also check a holding service and actually build a ROTA and do a lot of the tasks that any other kind of commercial broker might do. So the point being that whether you're working in Alma, I mean, one of the things that New School's investment in this is that we'd like to do all of our resource sharing request processing in a single platform. So we want to do it in Alma, but we also want to talk to ReShare, and Crosslink may be a way of doing that while the 1866 version is still kind of in this transitional state. So just to give you guys a bit of an idea, Trove is seen as a single partner in Alma. What this means is that all 400 plus libraries are actually seen as a single partner within the system. So there's a single symbol that represents Trove. But when the request goes out there, Crosslink will actually look at all of the potential partners and will actually build a ROTA, try to fill it. And then if there are no partners that can fill that request, it'll actually send an unfilled message back to Alma, and Alma can then go out to Rapido or can go out to other partners or other networks in order to fulfill that request. So rather than just thinking about a ROTA as individual libraries, we've begun thinking about a ROTA actually representing groups as well. So here you'll see an example. Normally what happens is that when CAVAL requests go through, they'll look at the holdings that are in their respective pod, Trove as well. And then if they get to a place where they can't fill it, that's where Crosslink basically will send the message back and forth between the systems and will request the material from the other network. There is a lot of kind of modification that has to be done to the messages, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of those are. One of the things that's both the blessing and the curse about this is that this one symbol of Trove within Alma can literally represent hundreds of libraries. And so one of the problems that we have is thinking about how we actually print shipping labels or how we print slips or resource letters or other types of things. So in thinking about the pros, one of the things that's really great about this is that it slipped right into our workflows very easily in terms of being able to fulfill and get these messages back and forth. One of the problems with having a single symbol represent all of these libraries is you may not necessarily know where that thing is, where that request might be stuck. If you remember, one of the things I talked about was conditionals and being able to set conditions on a particular loan within the ReShare system. One of the things that still has to be kind of worked on is how do we actually send those conditions and how do we accept them? There's a kind of proof of concept workflow for that, but it can definitely be tightened. And print slips are also awkward, and I'll show that in a second. Luckily, one of the things that Alma allows us to do is it exposes the notice templates so that we can actually expose that information. So here you'll see that we've modified the shipping letter or the slip so that we can actually put this information in a request note. One of the things that is a frequent hack with a lot of these types of things is if you don't know what to do with it, just put it in notes and you'll figure out, an operator or a human will be able to figure it out themselves. And in this particular case, you can see this is the information that actually needs to go to the shipping on the shipping label in order to send the item back. So here's a request from start to finish. In this particular case, Mallory and I were just kind of playing around and sending a message. You'll see here's the return request as well. This takes returnables all the way from the beginning to the end and back again within the kind of ReShare crosslink system. One thing I do want to give a shout out to is Mark Sullivan and the folks over at IDS Logic who've been working with index data to sponsor a lot of this work. This would not be possible without this bridge. Where we want to go would be to actually have the protocol support a lot of these types of things so that we don't have to stuff a lot of this stuff, these kind of mistakes in these notes sections. Now, I'm not saying get rid of all humans in ILL. That's not where I'm going at all. But the point is that this should definitely be more seamless than it is. Some other issues, as I was talking about notes, one of the things that we came up with, and this was actually purely by accident, was that having a US library actually talk to an Australian library meant that all of a sudden we're talking different currencies. And so there was a whole bunch of other configuration that had to happen in order for New School to actually support Australian dollars and vice versa. This had a lot of impacts in terms of some of the information that was able to be sent or not sent within the message. So we could say, for example, that we wanted express service, but we couldn't tell how much it was because when I was sending the transaction, it was coming through in US dollars and none of the ALMA systems actually had supported US dollars in their currency. And so we realized that there was this kind of problem just in being able to make sure that we're dealing with currency properly. This has been a problem with ISO 1866 for quite some time. This is something that we're going to be working on in the new version. But the other thing was that ALMA has an incredibly rich set of fees that can actually be sent in a particular transaction, whether that's shipping, copyright, service fees, or other types of things. ReShare has a shipping costs. So being able to make sure that that the right amounts were actually aligned between the systems, again, something that's really important as we talk about more seamless interoperability. So some of the lessons that we learned from collaborating with Ex Libris, and again, I want to thank Katie as well as Mike, as well as everybody, because this was, like I said, incredibly resource intensive. all the way from the developers at Ex Libris to the developers at Index Data, collective meetings, many, many meetings, hundreds, it feels like hundreds of hours of meetings. But I think that we can say that not only was this rewarding, but to be able to see not just returnables, but non-returnables work meant that we were able to have these two very different operating systems of resource sharing to be able to talk back and forth to one another. We learned that integration is so much social. In just being able to get people to actually work towards common goals was an incredibly important part of this. So as you're thinking about new systems, don't just think about systems in terms of the standards that they have to comply with, but really think about what it is that you want to have, what it is you want to accomplish. The other thing we found out was that libraries don't just want to throw things over a wall to other networks, but they also want to talk to peers inside of those networks. So the final lesson, I think, is a funny one. It's that basically left to their own devices, users will use tech in whatever way they possibly can. I mean, the joke that we had, and this went around quite a bit, was that emoticons, really? This is the thing that we're going to spend our time on? But the fact that they were actually supported in Alma was kind of a pleasant surprise to see. In fact, it was funny. I remember Katie actually saying, I don't even know that that was possible. So being able to kind of find out about these systems and how they were going to interact with one another also brought a certain level of levity to things. So I want to talk for the last 5 minutes in what's coming with the next version of ISO 18626, because I think that some of this will bring this collaboration forward, and you'll see that there's some new functionality that we can bring to it. Whether it's fees and payment, there's an extension framework so that a lot of this innovation can actually happen without actually needing to adopt a standard. Making errors more human readable, better support for digital lending, encryption and authentication guidance, this unship business. You can think of how difficult it is to send an unship message to a supplier who may already be in the process of looking for something, but imagine what that might look like when you're sending that to another network. So these are some of the problems that it's going to fix. And finally, we're thinking about ways to and requirements for different kind of ILL systems when it comes to keeping kind of a centralized address book. One of the roles you might think about for a national library who's issuing ISIL symbols to libraries is how can we actually facilitate the connection between libraries within different networks and that have different roles. Here are some of the folks who are going to be working on the new version. You'll see here a combination of librarians from all over the world, as well as different companies. This is the implementer group that many of these folks actually were part of the previous version of 2017. And they're now joining the new version. Here's the roadmap in terms of what it is that we're thinking about. Yes, we're going to focus on financials. Then, whoops, I think, and then throughout the year, we'll basically go through each of those topics and then spend 2027 actually writing the protocol. So I do want to say that when it comes to how to get involved, if you email that Gmail address, you can register your interest for any one of the subject areas I talked about, whether it's financials, whether it's some of the copyright schemes, whether it's the network-to-network stuff. We are looking for practitioners and librarians to actually help inform some of these user stories. At an institutional level, I would challenge you all to think about the networks you wish to trade with, not just nationally, but internationally, and what systems are they actually running? The other thing, and one of the things I think that was the most innovative about what it is that Sarah did, she made those discussions public. And I cannot stress enough that working with vendors who know where it is that what your group's goals are facilitates this type of collaboration in ways that I didn't even think possible. So as you think about some of these, as you think about some of the innovations that you'd like to introduce, remember the social part of this, because it's absolutely critical in order to, in terms of getting what you want. If you are issuing RFPs, don't just think that by saying something is ISO 18626 compliant, that you're actually going to get what it is that you want. You're going to basically get something that can talk really, really well with other libraries within its network, but not necessarily so well with libraries outside of its network. And finally, one of the things that I want to say is that particularly for national libraries, there is an absolutely critical role to play in kind of moving the open infrastructure as well as the ISO standards forward in ways that individual libraries and individual academic institutions just can't do at scale. So as you think about kind of scoping the technology of the network, you know, remember those things in ways that the National Library may be able to inform those conversations. So I just want to thank everybody, and we have a little bit of time for questions in case people are interested.
Alan and Sarah, that was an excellent presentation. In terms of questions, if anyone in the room has a question, please just raise your hand and I'll point to you, and then you can use that table mic. And then I think we also have some questions in the chat, so we'll make sure to kind of alternate between the two. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw your hand up. Just gonna give people time to type in the chat. This is where I always feel I need some music. I mean, it was an excellent presentation. You covered things very well. Yes, I see a question over here. Yes.
Hi, Alan. Hi, Sarah. This is Abhijit from OCLC. Nice to see you both again. Just curious, you talked about, for the 2027 version, we're thinking about authentication. When you implemented the current implementation in Australia, what kind of authentication mechanism are you using right now? Thank you.
You're going to laugh at this, Abhi. Abhi has, again, Abhi was on the last group. He's saying this, I think, for the benefit of everybody to hear more than anything else. We implemented PKI. Everything is open.
Okay.
There is no exchange of API keys. There's no OAuth. And part of that was a commitment to open, right? That any library should be able to at least present a request to another library, and the other library shouldn't have an API requirement in order to send a supply message back. And so being able to make sure that that was compatible, I think was a core value that everybody had within the group. And so I'm really appreciative of the fact that Alma, for example, doesn't require an API key for its ISO 18626 endpoint, and neither does ReShare. And so that makes things much more open and that word can be overused at times, but it really is open. You can present a request, and as long as the library is in your address book, the request can be accepted.
So Cynthia Holt, Council of Atlantic Academic Libraries. There was a note here in the chat from Sabina Pagato from Scholars Portal. I think it's good to remember that we had some of these same challenges with old ISO too. It's just been so long since we implemented it that no one remembers those old implementer profiles anyhow.
And Sabina, to your point, and I think this is really important, one of the things that ISO, the 1866 group, is trying to crack is a lot of those implementer profiles were human readable. You had to figure out how to configure the system, right? Part of what it is that we still need to figure out kind of, are you saying soda or are you saying pop? And if so, can there be some type of a translation layer for that? But it needs to be machine readable. And so this is where it is that we see a real challenge for the new version of the protocol. But it's going to open up a tremendous number of opportunities for address books. And Rebecca Smith, how widely has ReShare been adopted in other places? Are there other national challenges? I would say that ReShare has been adopted mainly in the US by other consortia, but it also has been, I think Trove and CAVAL has been the largest scale project. There have been some other groups that have
definitely
registered some interest.
Well, I really don't want to have a seizure.
Oh, somebody is not muted, I think. If everyone can just double check and mute.
Yep.
Apologies. Thank you.
But one of the things I think that was useful is not just thinking about ReShare as a platform, but also the other piece of it, which is the cross-link piece of people being able to have networks that they have already choosing and still be able to throw something to Trove or to other places as well. So one of the things that's useful about this project is it doesn't lock you into a single vendor or a single broker. You can actually have multiples. And I think that was the real challenge that we had with the Australian project was we had some folks talking Rapido, we had other folks who were talking ReShare, and how do you get these two communities to talk to one another? And I think for me, that's the core part of this project. And I think we've actually done a pretty good job with it.
We have two questions in the room. So we had Katie Puxley and then Andy. Katie?
Am I on? Okay.
Yeah.
As Katie McCaskill said, I'm Katie Puxley from NASCAD. Resource sharing has been the bread and butter of my career. It's where I started my internships, it's where I've continued, and I refuse to leave it alone. I fundamentally think it represents what we do as libraries. We share to the public, yet we can't seem to wrap our head around sharing to each other. That baffles me. I love this project. I love what you're doing. I've moved through many libraries and many networks, and the problem has always been Rapido, Medline, being locked into networks. I want a product that manages my requests and I borrow where I borrow from the person that has it. How do I do this in Canada? What? No, and I'm very, very serious about this question. We are currently collapsing. Our products are going away. They're being more, the vendors are stepping in to fill those voids. But how if we wanted to execute a national system here, what do you think are our first steps and what do we need to do?
Personally, it's about starting with an open conversation and having a very transparent review process. I think, and especially with the way that the National Library ran it, there was surveys upon surveys and communities of practice built over and over again just to talk through what were the needs of every single library that would potentially be part of this whole process. And that became a very pivotal piece in the way that the tender was released, and everyone had an opportunity to look at that tender and respond to that tender. And it was a very open process from there. And I think to make interlibrary loans in my world is also just as important as it is for you, especially because we, can't necessarily get access to the materials that you have overseas, but to have a system like this will allow us to be able to connect in the future. And I think making sure that you have those open conversations will actually help you design a system that suits you and not necessarily the other way around and being given a system that fits, that you have to fit to.
And I'm just going to echo something that Sarah said. It's all about requirements, and it's all about the way that you structure your tender. As I was trying to say, it's not enough to say that you're complying with the standard. You really do have to decide what the goals of a national lending network are going to be. And I actually think that Australia was very clear in what its deliverables were. I think the challenge was trying to figure out, and I could open this up to Katie or others. It was literally on the Ex Libris side, it was, how are we going to get this to work? I remember several conversations going, they want this, but how are we going to do this? Right. And so I think that's where the innovation really happened, was that there was this requirement that the protocol itself didn't even meet. And so some of this was going to have to be done with middleware like Crosslink, but some of it actually has to get baked into the ISO standard.
Okay, so we are almost at our time, so Andy will be our last question. But Alan and Sarah, if you're okay, perhaps we can gather some of the questions from the chat and email them to you, and maybe get some responses. Perfect, thank you. So Andy?
Hi, I'm Andy from the University of King's College here in Halifax. I think you were both so thorough in your presentation that it's almost hard to ask any more questions because you just answered a lot of them. But my question would be more so, in the experience that you've seen, do you think, are there any types of libraries, sizes of libraries, libraries with maybe reduced staff or system availability that have been left behind in this experience, and what that kind of looks like and what support would look like to kind of get them involved?
From the Australian perspective, we've got libraries that are in the middle of the outback that are literally running off spreadsheets, that have access barely to the internet at the best of times. It's quite patchy. And when they can get access, because it's such a quick loading system, they log directly into ReShare and they can borrow through the system that way. It's making sure that you have enough training material. So we created videos, we created full documentation, online training sessions. It was very much a hand-holding project, because it is also a significant change, because these libraries have been using the one system for such a long time. There is a whole change process that also needs to be put into place, and that's not something that we covered, but it was a massive change process. There was lots of communications and outreach, and like I say, communities of practice everywhere, just to make sure that no one was left behind. And we were very much trying to make sure that even the small library in the middle of the outback will get access and able to provide or even get access to materials. And it is mostly communication that we had to make sure that we did.
I mean, I just want to kind of amplify something that Sarah is saying. Trove is over 400 libraries. This is of various sizes and everything else. The change management part of this was huge. And to be able to work with some of those folks who were, the documentation was absolutely critical in being able to get them to move things around. As Seb said this in the comment, that there's some libraries that use ReShare as just a workflow or a mailbox even, to figure out if somebody is requesting something from that very small shop. They may open up the supply app in order to see that somebody's requesting something and be able to respond. So I know that Rapido has its own option of a freestanding system that's integrating with other ILSs as well. We're starting to see this kind of mix of vertical and horizontal integration with these types of niche systems as part of what's happening in the interlibrary loan and interoperability space, this kind of mixing and matching of components. And I mean, of course, ILLiad's done that for time memorial.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. It's just going to be a round of applause. Yeah. Yes. It's a lot of good stuff in there. And just thank you so much for that.